Hi there, welcome to this lecture. I'm looking at how to write a methods in context education essay. This is for A-level sociology from AQA. Apologies, my voice is a bit sore today and there might be a bit of background noise, but I'll try and make this as clear as possible. So firstly, what actually is a methods in context essay, if you haven't come across them yet? Well, in every one of your Unit 1 papers, your Education with Theory and Methods paper, you will be asked to use an item to evaluate the strengths and limitations of a particular method, to investigate, and there'll be some context or some topic from education. The essay is worth 20 marks. So it is, it's a big essay, but obviously not as big as the 30 markers. So here are some examples of some questions you might get. You will get a question that says, use an item to evaluate the strengths and limitations of using group interviews to investigate male anti-school subcultures, for example, or using field experiments to investigate the impact of pupil premium funding on working class achievement, or using observations to investigate the impact of teacher labelling on different social groups. So the green bit is obviously the research method. The red bit is the context that you have to link your points to, okay? So every time you do a strength or weakness of group interviews, for example, you have to say why that is good or bad for finding out about male anti-school subcultures. The key skill that is assessed in this essay is your ability to apply what you know about the method, so application, AO2, to the specific context given in the question, hence methods in context. So for example, it will be difficult to get valid data in group interviews with groups of boys, as they are likely to either shut down or show off in front of their anti-school friends to gain status. That is what's called a band 5 point. That would gain you marks in this essay, because I've clearly linked the fact that group interviews aren't that valid because anti-school boys are more likely to show off in front of their mates because of the peer group, okay? And you guys know this, all right? So it's about making these sorts of points throughout your essay. So the minute you get your essay question, and I'll show you it in the next slide, I want you to think who and where. So who will the participants be and where will the research take place? And the next one I couldn't think of a good word for, so I've just said, will anyone cry? So have a quick think. The topic that you've been given, the context you've been given, is it sensitive in any way? Is it controversial? Okay? So let's have a think about the who. So in education, you're fairly limited with who your participants are going to be. They're going to be parents, students, or teachers, possibly policymakers. And I guess within the teachers bracket, you might also think, are they going to be senior leadership? So they might have a slightly different agenda if they're like the head teacher or the deputy head, for example. So once you've had a quick think about who they're going to be, write that next to the item that you've been given, and then quickly write, are there any strengths of weaknesses of researching each group? So you know, if you've got to interview a student, you're going to need parental permission, for example. You know, teachers are quite busy, so they haven't got the time to take part. So those kind of points are quick ones to note down, and that helps you on your way to getting a better mark. Where will the research take place? Slightly more options available here, but again, the context is education. So classroom is going to be your number one site. Other school spaces like, canteen, hallway and what have you. In the home, okay, so to have to think about that in the home, parents are at home. Or at the school gate, parents are at the school gate. Or perhaps off-site, particularly students who might be high levels of truancy or even illness. They might not even be on the school site, so how are you going to research them? And again, have a quick think about what are the strengths and weaknesses of researching each setting, and just get those ideas down the minute you see the question and have read through the item. Quite often the item will give you big hints as to who would be the participants and where the research might take place. The final one is going to rely on your knowledge of that topic, okay? So when you see the context you've been given, the topic you've been given in the question, you'll think, is there in any way that they are controversial or sensitive, okay? Is the participant going to lie to you? Are they going to try and hide something from you? Or are they going to try and over-exaggerate to you? Are they going to get upset? Okay, so obviously they're lying, that's a validity issue. They're getting upset, that's an ethical issue. And another one to think about is the head teachers of the school or what the area that you're in. Will they actually want whatever is being researched published about their school? Because quite often head teachers, as you know, from marketisation of education, are very concerned about the, if you like, impression the school gives to their catchment. And they want to make sure that parents want to send their kids there. So they're not going to want you to publish something that says, hey, I found out your school's racist. I don't want to send my kids there, obviously, if that happened. So all of these things that you can get down will get you closer to writing a top-level essay for methods in context. So here is an example of a methods in context question. I think this is 2018's one. I always find it useful to read the question first, and then the item. So it says here, applying material from item C and your knowledge of research methods. Evaluate the strengths and limitations of using participant observation to investigate pupil exclusions. So this question was very specific. It said participant observation. Hasn't actually said whether that's overt or covert. So that is something that you could write about in this essay, and the issues around those two different types of observation. But yeah, the topic or the context you're going to have to link all your points back to is pupil exclusions. So make sure you know what a pupil exclusion is. Okay. Again, it doesn't actually say about whether this is external exclusions or internal exclusions. So, you could write about that in your essay if you feel confident to do so. So obviously internal exclusion is when you're excluded inside the school, maybe down into the behaviour unit or whatever it might be called, the welfare unit. The item, however, does give you a few more indications about the type of stuff you can write about. You don't have to use the item, but it is definitely very useful if you do. So it says pupil exclusions take many forms. Permanent exclusions from school are rare, but one pupil in every 20 is excluded for a fixed period, often for physical assaults against staff. There are no reliable figures for pupils sent out of individual lessons. Yeah, that's a good one to think about. Perhaps from your school's behaviour policy, that students probably do get excluded from lessons if they get, in my school it says a consequence 1, consequence 2, but if they get a consequence 3 in the lesson, they get excluded from that lesson, for example. So you could write a bit about that. Anyway, pupils may also self-exclude by truanting, so they don't come to school, or simply switch off in class. So straight away I'd be like, how on earth would we even measure that? Boys pupils with special educational needs, poorer pupils, and gypsy, Roma and traveller pupils are much more likely to be excluded. One way of studying pupil exclusion is to use participant observation. By adopting an appropriate role, the researcher may be able to get close to pupils. However, participant observers usually can only study fairly small groups. Furthermore, success greatly depends on the researcher's ability to establish a good relationship with those being studied. So again, you might be thinking straight away, well, what would be the appropriate role that a researcher could adopt? One of the biggest problems of doing participant observations, as you know, in schools, is that the researcher is significantly older than the students. So that really does limit their ability to covert participant observation. But yeah, they might be able to spend a lot of time with the group so that they forget that they're being researched. Paul Willis, you should know, did a bit of participant observation, and he was quite clearly not a student. He was a man with a moustache, so yeah, he definitely didn't look like a student. But he did very much manage to gain some very valid research purely by spending so long with the boys that he studied. Anyway, so let's going back to what I was talking about earlier on, the who, where, and will anyone cry. The who, and the item's been very kind to you here. It's given you the who. Students will be the who you're going to be researching and you're going to be trying to maybe kind of spend time with. Boys, pupils with special educational needs, poor pupils and gypsy, Roma and traveller. Parents would be quite difficult to do participant observation on, but you might be able to do something like with them perhaps at the school gate, but that would be really challenging. And possibly teachers, if you took on the role of, maybe a teaching assistant, for example. But obviously, again, this it doesn't say whether this is overt or covert, so that would be covert if you're going to pretend to be a TA, and in order to perhaps observe why teachers throw kids out of class and take them along the exclusion ladder. The where, this is going to take place definitely in school, I would say, but also not just in the classroom. What sorts of behaviours around school might lead to students getting excluded and how are those dealt with, fairly or not. And again, the item helps you out with this one. They mentioned truanting. If those students are truanting, you're going to have to find them off-site. Okay, so going maybe town centres, parks, where do truanting students go off to hang? You wouldn't use participant observation in the home. That's why I've not put that down there, okay, because you're not just going to be able to just show up in someone's home and perhaps fit in. But perhaps off-site in public spaces, you might be able to spend a lot more time with the group, studying them, studying them, getting to know them and find out, their norms and values and what have you, to maybe figure out what is it that perhaps leads to pupil exclusion. Finally, will anyone cry? This is a very sensitive topic for teachers, students and parents. Teachers aren't going to want to come across as being prejudiced, racist in any way. Students might get upset if they have been excluded. And parents are very rarely going to want to give a bad impression of their parenting or their own son or daughter. So they might, again, lie. And there's a good chance of all of them getting a bit upset. And of course, head teachers might not like the findings, okay? You might get a quite enlightened head teacher who might want to find out why certain types of pupils from different class, ethnicity and gender backgrounds are getting excluded more than others, and they might want to find out why. Many head teachers might not want that information to be found and published in case it affects their intake of students the following years. I've mentioned this before, but I have marked for AQA in the past, and methods in context are one of my favourite essays to mark, but I'll just take you through the mark scheme here. So you can have a band. We band every single statement or point that you make, and then we sort of count up the bands at the end and work out which one you sort of fit in best, but it's slightly more complex than that. So if you do a band or one or two point, you've basically written about the wrong method, or you've recycled something from the item, or you've just stated a strength or a weakness, but you haven't developed your point. So if you look at the next slide, this point here, this is a band 1 point, because it says field experiments are valid because you can spend time talking to participants and build a relationship with them. Well, they're not, because you can't talk to people in a field experiment. You're supposed to just be an observer. So that's an incorrect point, probably band 1. Band 3, okay, so this is where we're aiming for. We're kind of aiming for band 4 and above, but a good band 3 is good. Band 3 is when you identify the strengths and weaknesses of the method, or just generally discuss the research context with little reference to the method. So here's an example of a band 3. Field experiments are very time consuming, as you have to spend a lot of time watching participants. Not developed, so probably low band 3. Or pupil premium students tend to have low attendance and may not even be in school to study. So that's a good point to make about the research context, okay? Pupil premium kids, but it's not very well developed, and there's no reference there to the method. Now, band 4 is a bit more difficult, but is when you get the extra points marks, when you identify strength and a weakness of the method, linking it to researching education in general, or identifying a research characteristic associated with the specific context. And I will do a whole lesson on research characteristics with you if I'm teaching you face-to-face. So here's an example of a band 4 point. To run a field experiment, you need permission from the head teacher, and they may not want the research done on pupil premium funding in case you find out that what they do is ineffective, which may put premium parents off sending their children to school. Finally, band 5 is when you can get 16 marks and above, which roughly is about an A and above, or a B, depending on which grade band was you're using. It's a band 5 point is where you've identified how those strengths and weaknesses of the method relate to the specific context in education referred to in the question. And the question I'm giving you the example of is the impact of pupil premium funding on working class achievement. So here you are, I've done a band 5 point for you here. Field experiments are used for studying cause and effect, such as the impact of pupil premium funding on working class achievement, as you could introduce a variable, such as a paid-for resource, to one class and not another. So, for example, free Wi-Fi iPads. And then you could measure the outcome in test scores. Obviously, then another point to that could be like, however, that's seriously unethical, giving something to one and not another, but I won't go into that. That is strong enough to be band 5. So the final slide I want to take you through here is what examiners are looking out for. So you know what you need to kind of almost tick off to make sure you've included in your essay to get towards the top marks, okay, to get above 12 effectively. So the way they mark is they mark the perfect band 3. So they mark the perfect 12-mark essay, and then we count how many extra points you've done that are band 4 or band 5. So band 3, just to remind you, is when you identify the strengths and weaknesses of a method. So say you know a research method very well, you write a really good evaluative essay just saying why interviews are good and why these ones are bad, or you just discuss the research context with a little reference to the methods. So the perfect band 3, just to remind you, has a range of strengths and weaknesses for the method and the question. So that could be questionnaires, and there's a variety of questionnaires. You might get specifically asked about postal, email, and obviously within the questionnaires you can have open or closed questions, or a mixture of of 2 of them. You might get a question on interviews. There's structured, unstructured, there's group interviews. I've never seen semi-structured come up in an exam paper, but semi-structured generally has a list of questions that are loosely followed, and there's lots of conversation around that. I would say that's definitely more unstructured than any other, but don't worry too much about semi, because like I said, I've never seen it come up on a paper. You might get observations, that the question might specify participant or non-participant, covert or overt. Again, the other type of observation is structured. The other type of observation is structured, which is when you would simply observe people and count behaviours and try and collect qualitative data from that. But don't worry too much about them. Again, I've never seen that come up in an essay. And then you have experiments, field or lab experiments, and finally secondary data. And that can be documents, which are generally qualitative, or statistics, which is generally quantitative data. So you could get a question on any of those methods, but obviously the question would say, using this method to research a specific topic. Now, you also, in order to get the perfect band 3, you must do the positivism versus interpretivism theoretical debate. And within that, you need to talk about what each considers to be valid in terms of the method that you've been given. So, for example, positivists generally really like questionnaires as long as they use closed questions, because that means that they can easily analyse patterns, and that's what they would see as a very valid source of data. Whereas interpretivists like open questions in questionnaires because it allows the participant to explain themselves and the research to gain better insight into the thoughts, feelings of the participant. And finally, you must discuss a range of ethical, practical and other theoretical issues in your essay. So theoretical issues are obviously representativeness, reliability, not to be confused with validity. They mean 2 different things. Valid, how true something might be. Reliability, how easy it is to replicate that method and get similar results. But the weird thing about the methods in context essay is that for each of the above that you do not do, you will lose a mark. Okay? So say I've marked and I've said, right, there's loads of strengths and weaknesses about this method. This is a really good 12 band 3. But then I say, oh, hang on, they haven't done the positivism or interpretivism debate. I'll -1. I'll be like, oh, actually, they've only done 1 ethical point. I'll take another one off. And then I say, oh, actually, they've not done any practical points. I'll take another mark off. Okay? So you must make sure you do each of those things, okay, in order to get the perfect 12. To get above 12, you then also need to write some band 4 and band 5 points. So for every band 4, roughly, okay, every band 4 point you make is worth 1 mark, and every band 5 point you make is worth 2 marks. So if you can write the perfect 12 out of 12 essay, and then just do a couple of 5s, a couple of 4s, you're quite likely to do very well in this particular essay type, okay? So, I'm just going to leave you with this final slide to have a read through. It is my go, if you like, of a positivism versus interpretivism evaluation of participant observation on pupil exclusions. Okay, so you can read through that, you can pause it. I've done some highlighting of concepts, but that's not really the most important thing. I just want you to be aware of this, is that the marking annotation here. So I've done TH because I've opened up by talking about interpretivist sociologists seeing participant observations as being valid. That is a good theoretical point. It's only really band 3 at this point because I've just said about Verstehen and what have you. But then I've started to develop this point around, well, our research is spending a lot of time with traveller students. And they may see firsthand what it's like to be told off for acting, speaking and dressing in a way that school may view as bad behaviour leading to exclusion, but the researcher recognises as being normal in the traveller culture because of the time they spent with the participants. That's now band 5, okay? So that's a really strong up point. I say so myself, sorry. And then I've used positivism to criticise the closeness that develops between the researcher and the participant during participant observation, because they do not see that as being objective. So that's theory again. And then I've tried to develop this a bit better and apply it more to the traveller community specifically, about the fact that the researcher might end up feeling sorry for the traveller student and see the school as being racist, whereas positivists would say actually that's just because the research has become too close to the traveller student, and they're not seeing that maybe the teacher is following the behaviour policy of the school. But that wasn't so strong, I personally thought, about my own work, so I only gave that a high band 4, a low band 5, so maybe only 1 extra mark for that one. But anyway, do pause this and have a read through that properly. Thank you for listening, and this is my take on how to write a good methods in context essay. So good luck, guys.